Good morning and welcome to the Chamber's 2022 Congressional Series meeting. I'm Norm Becker, Chair of the Greater Albuquerque Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for joining us our event today, and we're pleased to welcome New Mexico's 3 Congresswomen for a conversation on important issues facing our city and facing our state. We've been holding this event for years, and it's always one of our favorites. Bringing what's happening in Washington, D.C. back home directly to our business community is so important to us. Before we get started, however, I'd like to recognize some great companies and organizations who are sponsoring today's event. P&M Resources President and COO Don Terry, New Mexico Mutual President and CEO Kelly Mixon, the University of New Mexico and its President Garnet Stokes, including UNM Health Sciences Center, UNM Comprehensive Cancer Center, UNM Health, UNM Athletics, and UNM Rainforest Innovations. French Funerals and Cremations President and CEO Tom Antrim, New Mexico Gas Company President Ryan Michelle, Western Sky Community Care Vice President Quinn Lopez, Comcast Vice President Chris Duncanson, Blue Cross and Blue Shield of New Mexico President Janice Torres, Fidelity Investments Vice President of Public Affairs Leanne Kravitz, Molina Healthcare Executive Vice President of External Affairs Carolyn Ingram, Presbyterian Healthcare Services President and CEO Dale Maxwell, Sunny 505 CEO Joni Griffin, and Molson Corbin and CEO Kevin Eads. Thank you to these great sponsors for their engagement and their generosity. We appreciate each one of you very much. We've got a lot to talk about today, so we're intentionally set aside the pre-program, and we're going to jump right in. I'd like to introduce Mike Canfield, President and CEO of the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center, and a Chamber board member and past chair, to introduce our special guest for today. Mike?
Thank you, Norm. Good morning, everyone. It's another beautiful day in New Mexico. Hope you're all able to enjoy it. It is my pleasure today to be here to introduce to our virtual audience New Mexico's 3 members of Congress, all of them women, each of them serving with great distinction and bringing tremendous energy to their positions. Norm, these individuals probably don't need a big introduction because I think we all know very well of them, and they all have long histories in public service. I would just like to state that, for example, Melanie Stansbury, who serves in the 1st Congressional District, has had a long career in working on water issues in New Mexico, which is so important to us. She serves on the Committee of Natural Resources and the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. So we're excited to have her. Yvette Herrell, which is the 2nd Congressional District, has also served in the New Mexico legislature, I think from 2011 to 2019. And she serves on the Natural Resources Committee as well. And Teresa Leger Fernandez is a third district, Congressional District, has a leadership role with the Congressional Hispanic Cultural Caucus, and also serves as the chair of the Subcommittee for Indigenous Peoples, and was an attorney and still is an attorney, has done great work in New Mexico and an advocate for many New Mexico citizens. So we're very excited to have all 3 of you here this morning. Welcome. And Norm, I'll turn it back over to you and we can go from there.
Thank you, Mike. Our aim this morning is to have a fairly fast-paced conversation about 6 different important topics. Leaders from the business community, each of whom are board members of the Chamber, will ask the questions today. Each question will be directed toward one particular Congresswoman, and after she responds, the other 2 representatives will have the opportunity to add thoughts if they would like to on that topic. And toward the end of our program, each of our representatives will have an open-ended opportunity to talk with us about other things they're working on or other issues that weren't covered in our questions. We have 1 hour to cover a lot of ground, so I ask that we're all sensitive to time. Of course, the state of our economy is top of mind for businesses and families alike. We'll start there. Leanne Kravitz from Fidelity Investments has our first question. It'll be directed our first question will be directed to Representative Stansbury. Leanne?
Thank you, Norm. Good morning, everyone. Representative Stansbury, the Gallup polling company is reporting that Americans are feeling some significant unease and a lack of confidence in the economy since 2009. And nearly 80% of people say the economic outlook is just getting worse. Consumers visit stores and restaurants that can't find workers, and it affects the store hours and quality of service, and prices are rising. I have to fill up my gas tank on the way home. I'm just dreading it. The stock market has been volatile, to say the least, and supply chain issues continue to affect consumers and businesses alike. Do you think we're headed for a recession? And in your mind, what should Congress and the president or the Federal Reserve, state governors, or anyone else be trying to do to get inflation under control and the economy back on track?
Well, thank you, Leanne, for that question. And thank you to the Chamber for having us today. I think that obviously the economy is one of the biggest issues that's on top of everyone's mind, as Leanne said. I think many are very concerned about all of the signals that are coming from the economy at large, that the US and the globe could be facing a global recession. But I think, I want to start by saying that everyone is feeling the impacts, and especially here in New Mexico, our small businesses, our local businesses, and our families are really feeling the impacts of these rising costs at the pump, as was just said, the inputs into raw materials, the cost of food, housing, real estate. All of our costs are going up right now. And I know it's really disproportionately impacting people who are on fixed incomes, and obviously our businesses that rely on all of these inputs in order to make their goods and services. So we have to address these issues. It's a huge issue for New Mexico, whose economy was already struggling. And I think it's important to take a moment to identify that the things that are driving this economic downturn are really global in scope. We're coming out of a 2-year pandemic. We've seen huge supply chain disruptions all over the planet. Factories were closed, people were not working. We have a globally connected supply chain. And, I know tons of businesses are having trouble getting materials, and our labor market is undergoing one of the biggest disruptions in generations. And it's very difficult right now for our restaurants, for our businesses to find workers right now. And as somebody who grew up here in Albuquerque, my family owns small businesses. I know how these impact our economy and our small local businesses. So in terms of the things that we should be doing at the national level and the things that we can do locally to help support our families and business, first and foremost, we need to be taking aggressive action in Congress and administratively to provide relief to families and to businesses. And that's really on the short term. How do we help lessen the impact of these rising costs? That includes, we just passed legislation a couple of weeks ago, the Ocean Shipping Reform Act, to address shipping costs and help with supply chain issues. We're trying to get a restaurant relief bill through the Senate right now that would help our restaurants. And of course, the various programs that we're doing to help support families. The Fed did just raise interest rates. It is a blunt tool. I think many of us are afraid that this could tip us into recession, though it will obviously slow down some of the other economic challenges that are happening. But long-term, New Mexico really has to invest in its own economy. Our state has always struggled to diversify our economy, and that's why I'm proud to have helped support the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which will help to build out our basic infrastructure, including broadband. I'm working very hard to help support local entrepreneurialism and small businesses to grow the economic sectors that we know are strong for New Mexico. Our state chamber of commerce and the local chambers have been working to identify those sectors with the state economic department, things like aerospace and technology. So I have a number of bills. And we have to strengthen our community supports. And so as a native New Mexican and somebody from a STEM background, I'm also very focused on how do we prepare the next generation of workers here in New Mexico and create pipelines and pathways for New Mexicans to find meaningful jobs in the economy of our future.
Thank you, Representative Stansbury. Representatives Herrell and Leger Fernandez, any additional thoughts you'd like to add to Congresswoman Stansbury's thoughts?
I would just add that I think we can all agree that New Mexico is a state that has struggled. And even though the national unemployment rate is down right now, we're seeing way lower numbers in terms of workforce participation. And that's across the country. I mean, with the inability to have a viable and ready workforce. And so we must invest in our future generations. We must invest in our kids coming out of high school, whether it's through STEM classes, whether it's through other opportunities that will give them the skill sets they need to go into the workforce, because that is hurting all of the industries across the board, regardless of what the industry is, just the shortage. And so I think when we can come together and find ways to enhance the workforce, help our students that are graduating high school be ready to enter the workforce if they're not going to go into a college situation, anything we can do. And I agree with Melanie, diversification has been something that I've talked about as well for our state. But we have just got to come together now and look at the bigger picture, get our crime rates down, ensure that our schools are better than 50th or 48th, because it's hard to recruit and retain good employment opportunities or companies to come here when we have those obstacles in our way. So I just think that looking at our business environment and the temperature of our country and our economy right now, I think Congress could do more to help, especially the rural communities and the large cities like Albuquerque to enhance their economic opportunities.
Thank you, Yvette. Representative Leger Fernandez, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I do agree with the sense that we are all struggling here in New Mexico, right? Because it is hard, like it's already been pointed out. And we all feel that pain. I think we all feel the pain as we say, what can we do about it? And I think I also want to go a step back and recognize that what the crisis we have been dealt, like the cards that we were dealt, came out of the pandemic. And I am pleased that we did pass the American Rescue Plan, because I think if we wouldn't have passed the American Rescue Plan, our economy would be in shambles. Every time I go into a restaurant, I say, did you take advantage of the Restaurant Revitalization Act? And it's often yes. And we know we didn't fund it at the level we needed because there was so much more need. But the PPP, the American Revitalization Act, all of that helped so that we didn't have an economy that was in shambles. Because I think our shuttered venues, our restaurants, our businesses, our small businesses are essential to actually have a thriving community. So we addressed that issue. And now we have to address the supply chain issue and the inflation. And Representative Stansbury pointed out what we did with regards to the shipping. We also passed a bill called the Lower Food and Fuel Costs Act, because we need to address how can we make sure that we don't have those big supply chains? How can we make sure that we are getting more from our own communities? I know lots of ranchers and farmers that want to be selling into our schools, selling into our businesses here. And so we need to make it easier for them to do that so that we are not as dependent on what's happening outside. And I'm really happy about the work we are doing on the Competes Act, precisely because it's going to benefit New Mexico. The Competes Act has already been passed by the Senate and the House, and we are now trying to reconcile the differences between the two. But I made sure that we included in that Competes Act language and legislation that would benefit New Mexico, precisely because we are in transition. We need to diversify that economy. It is going to put a lot of money into our semiconductor industry. It's going to put $52 billion into that. So places like Intel are going to benefit. We're going to make sure that we put more investment into research and development. We had the Secretary of Energy here. We had a roundtable here in Santa Fe 2 weeks ago to talk about how do we commercialize, how do we pull some of that wonderful science and technology that has been done at our labs and turn it into businesses here in New Mexico that'll stay in New Mexico, that will then hire New Mexicans who are going to be coming out of I love New Mexico Tech. I love our community colleges. I have met with every single community college and university in my district and talked about what do we need to do so that we create and train up students, whether they be coming right out of high school, whether they want to go into the trades and, maybe work as a welder or work on our wonderful wind farms, or be the coders we need. We don't have enough coders in New Mexico. So all of those things they're all connected, right? Education, the investment in innovation, the cutting those supply chains, and reinvesting in New Mexico. So what we need is made in America, but it's also made in New Mexico by New Mexicans.
Great, thank you, Teresa. Okay, let's move on to our next topic, which relates to the changes in New Mexico's energy landscape. This question will be directed first to Representative Herrell, and just like the last time, when she's finished, I will ask Representatives Stansbury and Leger Fernandez for a minute or two of their thoughts. To ask our second question, we have President and CEO of James Corporation, Shad James. Chad?
Good morning. Thank you, Norm. Thanks to each of you for being with us today. Representative Herrell, as a chamber, we embrace the energy transition is occurring in America, and we've supported things like the Energy Transition Act in the legislature. But we also believe that America can and should be energy independent. Oil and gas production here is better than doing it elsewhere, and we'll need bridge sources of energy like hydrogen, natural gas, and others as we continue to build our wind and solar capacity. How do we ensure that New Mexico, our state budget, our workers, and our families continue to benefit from and lead on energy production? And do you have any thoughts on how to mitigate the impact in the short run on families and businesses of high gas prices?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the high gas prices are, I can tell you, on everybody's mind all over the country. But energy independence is so vital to America. And it's also such an important part of our national security. And I just point to, just very quickly, China. This is why they're building so many coal power plants this year alone, because they don't want to be reliant on energy reliant on their adversaries or other countries for energy. And that's where America should be. Right now, it's the federal regulations that are hamstringing our energy production. Although we are producing up to pre-pandemic levels, we could be doing a lot better because we know the energy demands are going to only increase over the next decades. And I'm an all of the above energy person, but just like you point out, we have room for fossil fuels, for oil and gas, and for green energy applications. But we also need to be smart about this green energy because we need vital fossil fuels and the elements of rare earth minerals and others to get to the place we want to be as it relates to green energy. Right now, it's just not affordable, it's not sustainable, and we know that we can produce oil better and cleaner and more affordably than any other country. And that's what we should be focusing on. If we could get our energy level production even higher, it would drive the cost down. But the implications are not just production in the field, it is supply chains, it's sand, it's steel, it's all of these elements that play a role in our energy production. And New Mexico is blessed with these natural resources. In fact, we have one of the largest oil producing counties in the nation, but we have not had a lease sale on federal land since this administration took office. Now, we are supposed to have one, in fact, last week. It's been delayed, so we should see it maybe happen tomorrow, but it's about 20% of what we should be seeing in terms of lease sales in New Mexico and in the western states that have federal lands. We also see a tremendous backlog of permitting for pipelines, for exploration. These things are hampering our ability. And like you point out, this isn't just about energy in terms of gas prices. These are communities, these are schools, this is the state budget, these are jobs that are so vital to our state, to our nation. And I've been pleased to have introduced pieces of legislation that will actually protect New Mexico's energy sources, such as the, I wrote it down because I wanted to make sure that I got it right. But the public education, or the New Mexico's Jobs and Public Education Systems Act, which would actually exempt New Mexico's federal lands from the administration's moratorium in terms of drilling. So we have to be thinking about the big picture because energy touches everything. This is what's hampering our supply chains, the ability to get food to the shelves, the ability for people to fill up their cars, and the very people that we think we're trying to help, those lower income earners or those on fixed incomes, are the ones now having to make decisions between filling up their car with gas or buying groceries. And I think as we have just seen, and we're watching this economy, inflation at a 40-year high, there are things we could be doing to unleash energy independence in our nation. Would help us on a national security issue, but it would also start pushing those prices down. And I think that American people deserve that. And I think just from a national security standpoint, that's something that's so very important. And we are blessed that we have these resources. And right now our reserves are lower than they've been in over 20 years. We should be putting oil back into our reserves because that's going to compromise our ability to be energy independent at some point in the future. But it's unfortunate that this administration would be asking countries like Saudi Arabia or others to produce oil for us when we're sitting on just an amazing and abundance of natural resources here. So helping put the price, helping to push the prices of gas down. Let's open up our energy independence. Let's get our production going, and let's work collectively, both sides of the aisle, with our energy innovation. And let's look at moving to a green place, but we can't do it without fossil fuels.
Okay, thank you, Yvette. Representatives Leger Fernandez and Stansbury, we've got a minute or two for additional comments if you'd like to add something to that.
Oh, please.
Go ahead.
Oh, I would like to say, I've worked on climate and clean energy issues much of my career, but I was actually born in Farmington, New Mexico, and my mother was a machine operator at the San Juan power plant, which is one of course, the big electric power plants that is currently undergoing a big transformation because of the ETA. And my dad was a welder in the oil and gas fields. And so this is a very personal issue for me. I understand these issues very intimately and how they impact families and our local economies. And what I think is really important to understand is that what is driving gas prices at the pump is really global in scope. There is not a lot we can do here inside of New Mexico that will have an overall impact on gas prices for our families, but we are doing everything we can in Congress, and the administration is doing what they can to try to mitigate those impacts. But what I want to say is that New Mexico is an energy powerhouse, and we obviously are a major energy producer across all sectors. In addition to oil and gas and the huge energy transition that is happening in that sector, we are at the forefront of the clean energy sector. In fact, just a few months ago, myself and Representative Leger Fernandez and the governor joined for the opening of the largest windmill production facility in North America in Corona, New Mexico. This is the largest wind farm that has been opened in the entire United States. So I was proud when I served in the legislature to support the ETA. I actually helped to write the Grid Modernization Act that is helping to support the transition in our electricity sector. But we also have to observe that while we are an energy powerhouse in our state, we also are experiencing the impacts of climate change, and that if we do not aggressively pursue every possible way to cut our emissions, to cut carbon, and to make this transition, we will cross a global tipping point that will cause catastrophic impacts for our communities. And all you have to do is look around and see the drought, the fires, and all the things that are happening in our state right now to understand how these impacts are affecting everyday New Mexicans. So we've got a lot of work to do. We've got to work on all of the solutions to bring this renewable economy to its full realization in New Mexico. We have to be supporting our communities as they're dealing with the impacts of climate change. And I think it all goes back to economic diversification. The question was, how do we really support our communities that are currently employed by industries that are undergoing a huge economic change? And in the long run, that means we have to rebuild our local and our state economies in new ways that help to prepare us for this future. So that's investing in our STEM economies, investing in technology and renewables, and all of the things that we know New Mexico is really poised to excel at.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Melanie. We have about 1 minute left. Representative Leger Fernandez.
I'll be correct. I often speak about the Route 66 of renewable energy that New Mexico can do. In the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, we put money in there to make sure our grid was ready for the renewable energy that we can send out of New Mexico. And I think that that's really important. I also believe that when we train our workers, like the Mesa Lands Community College, they are training workers from across the country. Come to New Mexico because we have some of the best programs for training workers on how to work on those windmills. They come out and they start making a great salary. They're great jobs, good paying jobs. And so I think we need to do that. I have focused on making sure we do have a just transition and on diversifying those economy. I continue to get resources into our appropriations, into our legislation, so that we do focus on diversifying in our New Mexico economy. And I do look forward to that Route 66 of renewable energy in New Mexico.
Great, thank you very much, Teresa. Our third topic relates to the record-breaking wildfires, which we've already discussed just a little bit, we've seen this year. It's first going to go to Representative Leger Fernandez, followed by comments if they would like. Representative Stansbury and Herrell. Bill Miera, CEO of Fiore Industries, has the question. Bill?
Thanks, Norm. So Representative Leger Fernandez, we know you've been working closely on the wildfire situation in your home district. I'm sure it's affected you deeply. And we also, of course, have been concerned for our neighbors to the north. So 3 things about this. First, can you give us the latest on how the federal government is going to make this right? And, you know, we've heard things in the media about things expiring and support from them ending, things like that. Second, how do you think we can prevent this exact kind of fire, a prescribed burn gone wrong, from happening again? And then finally, how do we better thin our forests in the absence of an active logging industry and prevent wildfires over the long term?
Thank you very much. And thank you for acknowledging the pain and sorrow that my communities are going through. You know, I have spent the last, it's 3 months now almost, listening to those pain and sorrows, you know, being out there, having the smoke in my eyes, and they have lived through it daily. You know, a little anecdote is, these are the places that I grew up in, that we hunted in, hiked in, fished in. My sister asked us to spread her ashes in the place she thought was most beautiful. And that place is now reduced to ashes. So we have been very effective, I think. I've been pushing forward, the delegation has been great about making sure that the United States pays 100% of the cost with regards to fighting the fire, with regards to working now to recover from the fire. We are having to make sure that we both reseed, remove debris, build the barriers so that flooding does not become a second disaster. And right now, we have effectively had the United States step up and say it's our responsibility. And in each of the areas we have requested 100%, they have given 100%. So they have eliminated the local match, or for example, they eliminated the match from private landowners. I really push because so much of MORA is in private ownership, right? And they don't have the money to meet the private match for the work that needs to be done on private lands. So they've done that. I have a bill, the Hermit's Peak Fire Assistance Bill, that I introduced in the House, and that both of my colleagues on the thing here, we are all co-sponsoring this bill. We're all pushing this bill forward. The same Senator Lujan introduced in the Senate, and both of our senators are pushing for that. FEMA does not compensate you at 100% for natural disasters. You get about $23,000 for your primary home. But this is not a natural disaster. This is a man-made disaster. The United States Forest Service started not 1, but 2 fires that got out of control. I have railed, and at the report that I called for, because when you read that report, you see that they underestimated everything. First, they underestimated the value of our communities, and how dare they not say our communities deserve the highest protection and therefore the lowest risk. They then did not use data that they actually could have had access to. They did not go on the ground and determine the condition of the fuels on the ground. So they made mistake after mistake after mistake with regards to this prescribed burn. They used a 2006 environmental assessment. Well, we all know we've had drought since then, right? They didn't update it. And so those are kinds of mistakes that need to be fixed before there's another prescribed burn anywhere in this country, which is what I've called for. I have requested that there be an independent federal investigation. So what we got, the report came out of the Forest Service. I want an independent one so that we actually get recommendations on what to do so this never happens again, because there were so many mistakes. So that's the second thing. We need to know, how do we do these in the future in a way that they don't put communities at risk? And because there were so many errors made for this fire, I think we can get there, that we actually put a lot of, they like to use guardrails, right? We say you can only do these in these conditions. You know, you must go and check the conditions on the ground. We need to use the firefighting technology that is available. We actually don't use it when we do prescribed burns Well, that's silly. It's still a fire, right? We need to use that firefighting technology and forecasting for prescribed burns as well as existing fires. Now, how do we move forward in the future? Because we have a lot of beautiful forests that has not yet been burned and we don't want it to burn. In the bipartisan infrastructure bill, we put in significant resources to help with climate resiliency. I want to see programs like we have up at the Carson Forest, where we are actually paying leñeros, woodcutters, to go in and clean up the forest. We are, instead of charging them to go get wood, take it out that they can sell as part of their business, we are paying them $300 an acre to clean that up. So they then get the business opportunity to sell that wood later, and they are making money cleaning up the forest. Those are the kinds of examples where you are spurring local development, local business, at the same time that you are addressing this need where we do need to thin the forest. And so we are also calling on more research and how do we do this in a safe way, because those forests are a watershed. I am going up to Mora and San Miguel immediately after this call to go work and look at watershed issues, because we have destroyed a watershed up there, and we are going to need to figure out how do we get clean water to our communities. I am focused on that. I'm focused on all of these issues, and I'm so glad that this is a truly bipartisan effort for the state of New Mexico, the entire delegation. We are all there. We are all supporting the North, because in the end, we are all the North. There is nobody in New Mexico that doesn't know somebody from the North, that's not married to somebody from the North, or that doesn't still have their land back up north. So we are all together in this.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Representative Stansbury and Herrell, if you have additional comments in the minute or two we have left, please.
Yeah, I would just add to that I think we can revisit responsible logging, and we lost our timber industry in the 1970s. That's something that I think we could look at. I introduced the Wildlife Prevention and Drought Mitigation Act, which would actually streamline the environmental processes so that we could get to management of our forests. I mean, that's the biggest problem we have, is lack of real forest management, and it does impact our communities, our watersheds, like Teresa just mentioned. I introduced the Biochar Act, which would actually allow us to go and clean up the low-grade lumber, timber that's on the forest floor, clean up the bottom of the forest floor, so that we actually could use that product in our ag operations, because it is such a good water retention opportunity to put within our ag soils to help. In fact, we use it in New Mexico already, but there are things that we could be doing. But I would definitely say we need to look at responsible logging, timber industries, and look at responsible management of our forests.
Thank you very much, Herrell. Melanie?
Yeah, well, obviously this is a tragedy of epic proportions. I've been to the burn sites both north of Las Vegas as well as north of Ruidoso, and met with families who've literally lost everything. And I know that our president and those of us both on both sides of the aisle are deeply committed to doing everything we can to make those families whole again. The president was here just a couple of weeks ago and made direct commitments that he would do everything in his power, and FEMA has mobilized resources on a scale for a fire that we've never seen before, so helping to provide direct assistance to families immediately. But we know this is going to be a long-term process in terms of rebuilding for those families. Now, in terms of how do we address these fires going forward, we do have to manage our forests. Our forests have been neglected. Part of how we do that is through prescribed burns. We have never seen winds like we've seen before. The McBride fire down in Ruidoso was started after a 95-mile-per-hour wind whipped through that canyon. So we really have to change the ways in which we're doing prescribed burns. And in addition to that, as the other two congresswomen have mentioned, we need to really invest in the sustainable forestry industry in New Mexico. Now, there's a lot of programs that are working on that right now. We passed legislation in the state legislature that was bipartisan to help stimulate that, as well as there's programs forming at Highlands University and elsewhere to try to rebuild that local economic opportunity, because it is not only needed for forest management and fire mitigation, but also it's really good economic development. And finally, I just want to say that in addition to these wildfires, All of this is also being driven by drought, and myself and both of the congresswomen who are on this call today are also co-sponsors of a bill that we introduced to help bring long-term water security to New Mexico, the Rio Grande Water Security Act and the Water Data Act, which are completely bipartisan, and we're fighting to get those done. We're working with leadership in the House who is considering putting together a drought and fire package this summer, and we're hoping that we can get both our Hermit's Peak and our drought bills included in that to help bring both short-term and long-term relief to New Mexico and to our communities.
Thank you very much, Melanie. Okay, our next topic is the hot topic of public safety. And to ask that question, we have our President and CEO, Terry Cole. Terry, we're going to start with Representative Stansbury on this one.
Great, thank you, Norm. Representative Stansbury, what's Congress's role in helping community like ours battle with a persistent spike in violent crime? And also on homelessness, is there an approach you favor to increase the amount of overnight sheltering for the homeless and improving service delivery?
These are big questions.
Yes, they are.
So first, let's talk about public safety. Albuquerque obviously is facing a public health and a public safety crisis that are intermingled with all of these issues surrounding drug trafficking and drug addiction, behavioral health challenges, housing issues, and of course, violent crime. And this is happening all over the United States. We've seen a huge spike across the US. And there are, in fact, a number of things that the federal government can do to help support local authorities. First of all, we need to be making smart investments in our public safety infrastructure. In the state legislature, while I was serving there, we made the most significant investments in Albuquerque's public safety infrastructure in terms of radio safety equipment, ways to fight crime. And so now in Congress, I'm also prioritizing public safety in the same way through our community funded projects. Last year, I helped to fund a trauma center to help address violent crime in Albuquerque. It's the first of its kind. And this year I put in a number of requests, including to help get fentanyl off the street, to help with community supports around public safety and emergency intervention, and to help support our emergency and first responders on the ground. But we know that in Albuquerque, we also have challenges around recruitment and retention and pay of our public safety officers. And so this is a huge challenge. We're trying to also transition to a more community-based policing model in our city, and we have to address our economic development. So all of these things are intertwined. Now, housing and homelessness. We have an affordable housing crisis in Albuquerque. Anybody who has tried to buy a home in the last several months or the last year knows that the cost of real estate is off the charts. It has become completely unaffordable. And recent studies of the Albuquerque metro area and across the state, including especially in rural areas, show that we have a huge shortage in housing stock in our state. So one of the long-term things we need to do is really invest in affordable housing. In terms of how do we help people who are unhoused currently, we have a huge spike in unhoused individuals right now in the city, and there is no one single pathway. It really depends on what an individual's circumstances are, how they enter various support systems and continuums of care. But it's clear that we need to be investing in all of the different programs that help to support individuals, whether that's healthcare for the homeless or homeless shelters or the city's services, and help to break the cycle that the city of Albuquerque and the metro area are stuck in, where people end up in really acute emergency situations being unhoused and then end up in our hospital and emergency services care program. So I know that the city is trying to address the kind of emergency services piece of it. And I believe strongly that we have to be investing in affordable housing, supporting voucher programs. And for those people who are chronically unhoused, it's really important that we develop permanent supportive housing to help people get back on their feet, to help them, obviously, if they're struggling with behavioral health or addiction, to address those issues and to become housed and get back on getting on with their lives. So there's no one single pathway. We have to be really investing in a ecosystem that addresses both the underlying structural problems and helps individuals get to places where they can get care and get back on their feet.
Great, thank you very much, Melanie. Representative Leger Fernandez, we've got a couple minutes if you'd like to comment on crime and homelessness.
Yeah, I think she nailed it. But I would just like to add that, we have also, I believe, have to look at kind of this revolving door policies. I mean, we're seeing a lot of criminals that are not being held accountable for their actions. We're seeing district attorneys that are not holding perpetrators in jails. And so this no bail or this bail reform needs to be, I think, looked at, because I think it could be causing more harm than good. And it's critical for the development of our communities, of our state, to have safe communities. I think we need to defend our police departments, ensure they have the tools they need that are necessary for them to do their jobs. But I think, like Melanie says, this all kind of works together. We have to be serious about looking at different programs that would work in our various communities and start addressing those issues, because until we build healthy, safe communities, it's going to be very hard to expand businesses here, to recruit businesses here, and to help our economic growth.
Great. Thank you, Yvette. As Representative Leger Fernandez, any additional comments? Okay, I think we might have lost her for a minute. All right, let's move on.
Everyone, I was just gonna say that everyone deserves to be safe. And so last year in the appropriations, I will point out that we had a $506 million increase at the federal level. So we increased it by $500 million so we could send funding to state and local law enforcement, because we know our police need those resources to fight crime. And as Representative Stansbury noted, we have opportunities in our community fund. I call them community supported projects, the community directed projects, to highlight issues. This year, I am pushing for funding for the Curry County Law Enforcement to purchase virtual reality training simulators. And next month, I'm going to be bringing law enforcement officers across the state together to participate in a Department of Homeland Security training to learn how to better combat human trafficking, because we know we have an issue for our murdered and missing Indigenous women, and for all women. There are way too many children and women being trafficked in our country. And I think we have to think about how do we take a holistic look to keep our communities safe and thriving. And so, I am moving on the issue with regards to affordable housing. I worked on affordable housing for about 20 some years before I entered Congress and continue to push for that. We have requested funding for HomeWise, which works now in Albuquerque. It started in Santa Fe. So we're going to do homeownership assistance vouchers of $30,000, because when somebody needs help to acquire a home, it's when they are purchasing it. It's that down payment assistance. And then another area that I am focusing on is really making sure that we address mental health and behavioral health, because sometimes that is then, they're all interconnected. If you sometimes you're become homeless, unhoused, because you had mental health issues. So we need to make sure we address mental health issues. And I am focusing on that. I am part of the mental health task force in Congress, and have focused on getting more funds for both Taos County and Mora County to provide behavioral health and mental health services. So I think we all recognize that all of these issues are very interconnected, and we need to address them all at the same time.
Great. Thank you very much, Teresa. And now it's a very timely and concerning topic: fentanyl overdoses and drug trafficking. We'll start with Representative Herrell, and Janice Torres, President of Blue Cross and Blue Shield New Mexico, has the question. Janice?
Thank you, Norm. Representative Herrell, fentanyl on our streets has unleashed a cascade of tragedy in our communities, large and small, throughout New Mexico. It's one thing to decriminalize fentanyl testing strips, for example, which we supported during the last session. But in our minds, that's a good thing. However, how do we stop the supply? How do we prevent it from getting into our country? It's now the most trafficked drug across the US-Mexico border. Can we somehow choke that off? And should we change the law to more specifically and aggressively target fentanyl traffickers?
Yeah, it's a great question, and a lot of people are talking about it. First and foremost, in my opinion, I think we need to secure our southern border. We know a lot of this fentanyl and other drugs, illicit drugs, are coming across the border, but largely the fentanyl is now not only being produced in China, but now the cartel are able to produce it and sell it. It's coming across the border. In fact, just a few weeks ago, I met with the chief of police in Valencia County. It's interesting that they had found a backpack full of fentanyl with a tracker in it. So the sophistication now and the ability for these cartels and these drug smugglers to move this drug up and down the corridor of the I-25 and into the interior. It's the #1 killer in overdoses for people 13 to 45 years of age. And just last year, over 100,000 people died of fentanyl overdose, which is, to put it kind of in perspective, that's more people that were killed in the Vietnam War. Certainly we have an issue, a grave issue with this fentanyl crisis. But to me, I think securing the southern border, getting the boots on the ground, getting the resources that our Border Patrol agents need, our local law enforcement, state police, so that we can all work collectively to help in this, because now we can see that every state is a border state and these illicit drugs are impacting every single community. And again, healthy communities breed healthy environment, healthy economies. We don't have that now. And the concern, what we're seeing, and I just met with the Nurses Association just last week before we got out of session, the violent crimes being charged against our first responders, our nurses, or our EMS people, because of people that are overdosing on these dangerous drugs. I mean, this is no doubt epidemic. It's a huge problem, and we need to make sure that there's resources available for treatment, no doubt about it. But I think to just choke it off, as you say, and stop the flow, the first thing we have to do is secure the southern border, and then start really ensuring that we're criminalizing these people who are doing this to our communities, our children, and ensuring that they're paying the price for bringing these drugs into our country and selling them to our children across the nation.
I am somebody who knows way too well the cost to the families, the pain to families from addiction. I lost 2 brothers to addiction. And I know that it is incredibly painful for everybody, right? And this was before fentanyl, but I think that we need to recognize that we need to help those who have become addicted. And we need to make sure we do not lose. There are way too many young people who are now becoming addicted, and we're losing too many lives to addiction, whether it be fentanyl or any of the other drugs. But with regards to fentanyl, I really am co-sponsoring the Stop Fentanyl Act of 2021, so that we can work on those addiction, we can work on interdiction. These are very specific things we can do. With regards to helping our students, I'm very pleased that just last week, the House passed my bill, the Campus Prevention and Recovery Services for Students Act, to fight addiction and improve mental health services on college campuses. And, this is an incredibly bipartisan bill. All the Democrats in the House and 155 Republicans in the House supported it. We are looking forward to it being a bipartisan bill and passing in the Senate. And this is something that, I keep getting notes about from across the country, from states all over the place who are looking at that and are pleased about how this bill went forward, because they recognize that oftentimes drug use and misuse and alcohol use and misuse starts in college. And so, I think that that's really important. I was also very proud to vote for the American Rescue Plan, which included $16.5 million in behavioral health funding for New Mexico alone. Because I think that's really important as well.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Melanie, anything to add?
Yeah, I just want to say this question hits very close to home. In fact, on Monday night, we received a phone call that a family friend of ours had OD'd on fentanyl. And I think that if this has not hit your family, it is a tragedy and crisis that is impacting every family across New Mexico right now. What we know is that not only fentanyl pills, but the raw materials are crossing our southern border. They're being moved across the state, and they are also being manufactured within our communities across the state. So we have to stem the tide of the actual drugs themselves and the raw materials coming across the border, absolutely, through drug interdiction programs and law enforcement. We need to be supporting our law enforcement to be able to detect and intervene and address drug trafficking within the communities. But we also have to address the addiction side of the equation. What we are seeing now is, because fentanyl is so inexpensive, is people who have prescription opioid addictions or who were otherwise using street drugs like heroin are now using fentanyl and overdosing and dying. So we have to address the behavioral health aspect of this. I'm currently working on legislation with our community organizations who work on behavioral health and drug addiction and recovery programs. It's a huge problem. Our state needs to rebuild that infrastructure, and we need to be making investments in our communities.
Thank you very much, Melanie. Okay, our last question is a big picture one about the divisions and distrust in our country right now. This question starts with you, Representative Leger Fernandez, and will be asked by David Campbell, CEO of Mesa del Sol, and no stranger to government service himself. David?
Thank you, Norm. Representative Leger Fernandez, a lot of folks are worried about the general decline in trust for the various institutions in our country that have held us together for so long. These include everything from the media to Congress to business to religion to higher education. We're also concerned about just how easily topics become polarized, how our current political system seems to punish, not encourage, moderation and compromise. What's your experience been like in Congress? Do you feel these trends day to day? And what should be done to bridge our partisan divides and restore public trust in our institutions?
So I thank you so much for that question, because I think it is important for us all to think about, what do we want our government to do? What do we want our institutions to do? And I think that our communities want us to solve problems, right? They want us to help our communities reach their aspirations, bring the water that's needed, bring the broadband that's needed, address the issues we've talked today, from crime to housing to wildfires, right? And these are issues that are not Republican or Democrat. They are simply issues that need solutions. And I think that when we focus on that, when we actually go and listen to our communities and say, what are the issues you're facing? And then we take that back in whatever role we play, whether it's in Congress, whether it's on the Chamber of Commerce, that we take it back and say, how can we each individually contribute in a positive way to our community? And I think that you have heard today that that is a lot of how we are approaching things, right? I have worked on getting water to various parts of my very large district, right? So they needed water on the eastern side, which might be slightly more Republican. They needed water in McKinley County, which might be slightly more Democrat. That is irrelevant. Water is neither blue or red. Water needs to be clean. And that's what we need to do, is focus on bringing solutions and helping our communities not just survive, but thrive. Interestingly, I think that the media often wants to portray things as there's always fighting and there's complete division. The majority, vast majority of bills that I have voted on and that have gone to the president's desk are actually bipartisan. Every week, we will vote on maybe 20 bills, maybe more than that. And most of those are bipartisan bills. The vast majority of bills that I've introduced, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have said that's an issue I want to work on as well, and they've been bipartisan. So I think that part of what we need to do is go out and talk about the work we're doing in a way that is positive, that is optimistic, that we think that we can work on things so that we do have a better future, so that we do leave a better world for our children and grandchildren. I like the saying that we need to be better ancestors than descendants, right? Our job is to try to leave our communities stronger and more vibrant than when we began our work. And I think when we focus on that positive aspect, and we ask our media to focus on that positive aspect, that goes a long way.
Great, thank you, Teresa. That gives us some hope, honestly. Representative Stansbury and Herrell, additional comments?
I would just kind of echo what Teresa just said. It's polarizing because I think sometimes the media and social platforms just, I think, get in the way of actually what we're trying to accomplish. And it's clear some of the bills that we talked about today, even that the three of us have co-sponsored together. I mean, when it comes to, I think, taking care of our state, our constituents, we want to do what is best, but so many times things get so skewed. And I think personally, you have far left, you have far right, people that just kind of suck up the oxygen in the room. They're the ones that are kind of driving the narrative and the talking points on whether it's the news or whether it's social media. And it really is sad because the good work that's getting done is getting lost, and the American people deserve better. We need to make sure that we are putting people over politics at all times, and that we are actually answering the call to those who sent us to Washington in the first place, and ensuring that we're helping to build stronger communities, a better economy, securing the border, ensuring that our kids and grandkids will have more prosperity opportunities than we had growing up. And so I just kind of want to piggyback that a lot of times I think this, social media, it's one of the greatest tools, and it's also one of the biggest nightmares because of the way people just they just hold on to every word that comes from social media platforms without really knowing what the truth is or what the consequences, either good or bad, could be in a piece of legislation. So I think we have to be very careful, but I think it's our jobs as Congress women to continue to communicate with our communities and with our state and with our constituents and with our colleagues on both sides of the aisle.
Great, thank you, Yvette. Representative Stansbury.
I'll just add that I think Americans are hungry for bipartisanship and just want to see us get things done. The American people, New Mexicans, are pragmatic. We want to see our country serving us. We want to see our elected officials doing the good work, working together and getting problems solved. And so at the end of the day, that's what I'm focused on. I think that's what all of us are focused on. And unfortunately, the rhetoric and what we see in the media is so polarizing, and I think is by its design intended to make people feel upset and divided and to try to motivate them politically. But we have to be working together. And I hear that from all sides of the ideological spectrum, from the most conservative to the most progressive individuals. So as I've talked to New Mexicans across the state, they are proud that we're working in a bipartisan manner on these water and these fire bills because they see that we're working for New Mexicans. But I also want to touch on one other thing that was asked in your question, which is about our institutions. I think that right now, Americans, New Mexicans are at an all-time low in terms of their faith in government and their faith in institutions. And one of our jobs is not only to work in a bipartisan manner, but to really restore that faith that our government can and will serve the people, that we can reform programs and make them actually do their jobs and serve our people well, and that ultimately we're there to serve the best interests of our communities. And so the saying that I say all the time is we have to fight for what we believe in, but take the wins where we can get them and continue to have hope and continue to work on the things that we know matter, will bring change and help bring a substantive and meaningful difference for New Mexicans.
Great, thank you very much, Melanie. And thank you for your great responses from each of you on these very difficult, complicated 6 issues. We appreciate your candor very much. We're running a bit short of time, but we'd still like to hear from each of you. If there's anything else that you think is important that you want to share with us, we'll go in district order and start with Representative Stansbury, who, for example, has been working diligently on the issue of food insecurity and hunger in our state and nation. Whether that's it that you want to talk about, Melanie, or something else, we appreciate from here, starting off with you, Congresswoman.
Yeah, I just want to take a moment to talk about food security and about our agricultural programs in New Mexico. New Mexico, in addition to being an energy powerhouse, is also obviously an agricultural powerhouse. We are a place where food is central to who we are and our identity, and yet 1 in 4 children in New Mexico are facing food insecurity. I am a member of the Bipartisan Hunger Caucus. I've been working on legislation at the national level to help address hunger and food insecurity, as well as to help support our ranchers and farmers and address not only their water needs long-term, but also to ensure that we're helping them produce our food and get it to our tables. And so this is work that I've spent much of my career working on. I helped to establish the governor's hunger task force that is currently being led by the administration at the state level, and helped to get legislation passed that did away with co-pays for school meals. And it's worth noting that last week we extended the waivers for school meals that had been put in place because of the pandemic. And we know that will help alleviate hunger across our state. And so we are fighting to address these issues and really look forward to everyone across the state who cares about hunger, who cares about food security, and who works on and cares about feeding our families.
Thank you very much, Melanie. From District 2, Representative Herrell.
Well, first off, thank you again for doing this. It's been a real pleasure to be here, and I'm glad all 3 of us could be here, and thank you to the sponsors. But I think just moving forward, just there are so many uncertainties, and I think Melanie's right. The food scarcity and the questions there are concerning. I met with some ranchers and farmers earlier this week, or last week, and the amount of seeds being planted this year versus the norm is about 50 to 60% less in some areas. So I think we need to be mindful of what that's going to look like for our grocery shelves in the coming months. But I think right now, because of the divisiveness, it is just imperative that we come together and really work on behalf of the American people so that we can bring some sort of peace, that we can help them sustainability in terms of what their economies are looking at for their small businesses. And I think right now, a lot of us are struggling with and having to navigate unintended consequences for policies and executive orders that this administration has signed. This is an impact for our oil and gas industry, obviously fossil fuels, timber, natural resources in general. I think we have some good opportunities to come together, and the 3 of us have demonstrated how we can do so. But we need to be thinking about the American people, the people of New Mexico first, and bring some confidence to our government. Right now, it feels very overreaching and very overregulated to our businesses and to our communities. I think we need to work on that so that we can unleash prosperity throughout our state, throughout our nation. But right now, I think bringing an honesty and a transparency that the people hunger for is just one of the top priorities. And it has been truly my greatest honor to serve in this position. And I'm glad to be the voice from the 2nd Congressional District. And I continue to look forward to serving and look forward to continuing to work with my colleagues. And again, thank you for having this and giving us this opportunity.
Thank you, Yvette. And finally, from District 3, Representative Leger Fernandez, is there anything else that you would like to share with us that you think is important?
Yes, thank you so much. And once again, for this forum and for the thoughtful questions. So we know that at the federal level, our job is to appropriate, right? We had that marvelous Infrastructure and Jobs Act that has sent money down for broadband and our energy grid and clean water and roads and bridges. I am concerned because across, whether it's the infrastructure bill or the appropriations, we need to make sure that that money does not stay in DC. I want to make sure we bring every single dime that we could put to use in New Mexico to New Mexico. And so that's been something that I've been working on overall, right? And it's been wonderful. We've been able to bring, I was able to bring $74 million to particular individual projects in New Mexico that range from clean water to education to broadband. And we're doing that again this year, where we're going to be able to bring very specific projects, get those funded across our districts. But the issue of needing to then also access the significant federal funds that are available that you need to compete for. So I have been raising this. I have been championing our rural state and the need to bring that money down. As part of that, we were able to have the USDA establish the Rural Partners Network, which is they're going to fund positions that will then help rural counties apply for and get that money, right? Because you don't know that money's out there. If you don't have a grant writer, you can't get that money. And so that money sits in DC and it could be put to use down here. I was able to secure an additional $5 million for that program. We have one of those rural networks is down south, and another one is up north here for Mora, San Miguel, Taos, and Colfax, who are all going to be working together on a regional basis to access those federal funds that are available. Because once again, let's get that federal money helping our businesses, helping our ranchers, helping our local communities here in New Mexico.
Thank you very much, Teresa. And again, I want to thank all of you so much for being with us here today, and also for your dedication and your commitment to our state and to our country. Before we close, I'd like to bring Janice Torres back in for a few closing comments. Janice?
Yes, thanks, Norm. You know, it's really exciting to see a congressional delegation comprised entirely of women. Thank you for stepping forward and undertaking the tremendous commitment of representing New Mexico and Washington, D.C. Please know that as a business community, we root for the common ground to be found on all the issues we wrestle with. And we haven't lost optimism that we can restore a sense of civil discourse and respect for longstanding institutional norms in our society. At the Chamber, we're strong advocates for our job creators. We believe that when companies succeed and grow, it makes for a dynamic, exciting place where people want to live and work. And that's why it's our goal to work with those in government at all levels to make our city and state a great place to live and do business. And with that, we'd like to once again thank our great sponsors of today's event. And that wraps up our events for the summer. We look forward to seeing everyone in the fall for our next events. Stay tuned to the GACC website, greaterabq.com, for event information as it becomes available. Thanks again for joining, and we'll see you all soon.
Goodbye. Thank you for having us.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.